would you look at that? He's just one of the best managers in the history of the sport. The way his team tickies the taka, the way they knock that pelota around the pitch. It's simply unbelievable. Tremendous performance once again by Pep Guardiola. Wait, Zep?
Football Manager, baby.
Now what the f is this?
All right, we're bringing this back up. See, now I have not made these videos before because they made me nervous. Tactics in Football Manager are incredibly complicated, and there are so many different things that affect them that it is very difficult to hone in on a particular manager's style. But after spending hours upon hours, because why not? I play Football Manager for a living. Literally, what else am I going to do? Testing different tactics, we have a way for you to take the way that Pep Guardiola plays in real life, at least the archetype that he tries to emulate, and take and put that into the game. I'm going to provide you with a downloadable file for the tactic, but it's going to require tweaks based on who you actually have in your team. So if you want to see how the tactic plays, the different things that you're going to be looking for, and how you might need to tweak this tactic in order for it to apply to your team and get the best out of your players, that's what we're going to be doing right here. But here it is in all of its sumptuous glory. Formationally, we have decided to go with what is essentially a 4-3-3. Now, I've tinkered around with a lot of different three at the back stuff to try and replicate what City do in real life, but it's just the best way. It's the best way to get it into the game. It's not perfect. It certainly isn't able to replicate the style of pressing that City is normally able to play with, and it doesn't necessarily match up to what City's done this year. City's playing a bit more of a 4-4-2 this year, but we have captured the basic tenets of what Pep tries to do over the years, and even though he plays a 4-4-2, what we're going to be doing here is going to end up looking fairly similar at the end of the day, because his formations are incredibly fluid, which is the tenet of what we've captured. This tactic is complete all the way down to the set pieces, which will be utilizing short corners, short free kicks out of certain situations, and the throw-ins set up to operate from close quarters and playing short. We're going to take it into the match in a second to have a look at it, but what we first need to do is break down the thought process behind everything, and the fact that one of the roles is not necessarily set in stone and is fluid depending on which player you're going to be playing out of this particular position. First, the front line, where you have a complete forward. This complete forward can be on attack. If you are feeling like you need to be a bit more defensive, the complete forward can be on support, especially if you have great goal scoring output from the other positions in your team. There is nothing wrong with this complete forward being on support, because then they can be even more fluid, drawing center backs forward and allowing the runs from midfield and out wide to get in behind and victimize center backs that have absolutely no idea what's going on. On the wings, you're going to want at least one that is a ball carrier, that is looking to facilitate, that is looking to push the ball rather quickly. In this case, we've gone with Riyad Mahrez, and I've been playing Jack Grealish as a trequartista or a Raumdeuter. If I feel like him running with the ball too much is causing problems and not allowing us to play our game, then I go to a Raumdeuter, so he's going to pass the ball around in shorter fashion and then just work in tight spaces in and around the box to make things happen, because it will already be pretty crowded up there. But where things really get complicated in this tactic, and so City's first game of the season is against Brentford. I played that match a lot to make sure that this tactic was right, and the most frustrating thing for me to figure out was the freaking midfield. And it involved more people at one point. We had inverted wingbacks that were playing with Metsalas, but in FM22 that just doesn't work. They end up running into each other, so I had a lot of frustration, and what we've settled on is a center mid on support and a center mid on attack. But as you might have hoped, it is way more complicated than that. The center mid on attack is going to be told to cross less often, roam from position, and move into channels. The principle of the way the Pep coaches the game is something called positional play. Now, Tifo has made a really excellent video explaining it. I'm not going to sit here and explain all of it, but the idea is a fluidity and occupation of different zones. And the key here is that these same players are not occupying the same zones of the field at all times. So when we go into the match to see how this tactic plays, which we will, you will see players switching out of and into different positions on the field, which makes them inherently much more harder to much harder to mark, and also provides overloads in more areas of the field. So a fluid midfield is very important. A talented attacking midfield is very important, right? You need to be technical, you need to be intelligent, and you need to have the athleticism to exploit the space. Thusly, this is not a tactic that you and your 8th tier team are going to be able to wheel out and execute perfectly. This is a tactic that you're going to see much more at the higher levels of the game be much more effective, because it's going to demand players that know how to move and know when to move and can knock the ball around and get themselves into the position in the first place to move. On the left center mid, we have cross less often and also move into channels. We're not also going to put roam from position on, but move into channels does help facilitate some of that positional change. This is on the left side underneath what I would consider the more offensive wing out of the two. On the left, you can obviously switch this to the other side if that fits your team better, but under the more offensive wing, you want this center mid to be making runs all the way to the end line less often, and De Bruyne comes deep to get the ball, so he's somebody that can pick the ball up and help facilitate more. If you have them both on attack, that can be effective, but you're putting a lot on your defensive midfielder to pick the ball up and facilitate. Last but not least, we have the defensive midfielder, which in this case is Rodri. Now, Rodri is somebody that I've really been... This one was really frustrating for me to figure out. I had defensive midfielders with a bunch of different instructions, but I felt like playing out of the back, we just didn't look like City. And what you really need in a classic City team, when you're playing Pep's style, you need that defensive midfielder to drop in between the center backs to create an overload of the press so that you can knock the ball around the back as often as you want until you find that first penetrating pass, either to a wing dropping back or to one of your two more advanced midfielders who are basically the engine of your team, helping it tick over. They're the point of all of the triangles you build breaking the press, whether it's on the side. So to visualize this, you have your fullbacks and your wings, and then the midfielders, Silva or De Bruyne, they're the players that are the point of that triangle, right? They're pointing in. But then coming out of the press, you also have your center back and your defensive midfielder. They can build a triangle with one of those guys as well. Look, I know that if you rotate a triangle, right, there's a point on each end. But when you're looking at the triangle the way that we are, where you have 2 on the boundary, 2 on the back boundary, 2 on the side boundary, and then you're pointing in, that third point of the triangle is De Bruyne and Silva, and they help transition from the different points of the triangle. You can completely overload a press when you have a halfback. There's something, it's not in the player instructions, there is something in a halfback that just has them drop in between the center backs when you're playing out of the back that no other position has. They dribble less, they hold position. I wish I could remove that, but again, it's not perfect. Defensively, we want a couple of ball-playing defenders. What I would maybe recommend is only moving one of them to ball-playing defender, because that does include takes more risk, and this can be a bit of an issue because you try lower percentage passes. So if you play with 2 central defenders, it's not necessarily guys that just aren't looking to pass, right? This isn't a no-nonsense center back, but taking them off ball-playing is something I fiddled with. It honestly doesn't really matter either way. If you feel like you want to progress the ball a bit quicker, ball playing defender is the way to go. Now in the fullbacks, I like wide center back because they pick the ball up and they will advance it, but you actually have to go into the player instructions to add stay wider. A key tenet to the way Pep likes to play is you play around in your square for a while and then you hit the switch. The way that the wingers and the midfielders are going to play here, there's nobody else staying wide. The player that has to provide that width so that if you are going to hit the big switch after you pass it around for a while is going to be the other fullback. You have to tell them to stay wider. Them drifting inside isn't going to accomplish a lot unless you want your advanced wingers to stay wider, and then those inverted wingbacks can drift inside if that's something that's a strength of your team. But you need somebody stapled to each inline that's going to be somewhere up the field, because you need to have the ability to switch the ball, because that is so often what will open the play up. Now we go into our in possession stuff. Most of this is not going to be a surprise, especially if you've got narrow advanced wings. I think playing wider on an attacking width has been really helpful for me. You have shorter passing directness and standard tempo. Now this might be a surprise, but there's some key tenets here. One, when you play on really low tempo and really low passing, your team sucks in Football Manager. I'm not trying to give you it will very often suck in Football Manager, so I'm not trying to give you a tactic that sucks. I played a bunch of games against Brentford, and we didn't stop until we felt like we completely dominated the game. You also have play out of defense, work the ball in the box. These are 2 core tenets. Now, you can have individual players like Rodri, for example, that love to take shots from distance. They will still take those shots. If you got like Ruben Neves, who's on my Wolves team in the network game, they'll take those shots. If you have no idea what I'm talking about and you want to watch me play against Work the Space, Lelujo, and Dr. Benji, the Twitch link is down in the description, and that network game is going on Maybe even right now. You don't know. If you don't click the link, it could be. And then on your way back up, if you were already down there, maybe you haven't subscribed. Like half of you that watch these have not subscribed. And I would appreciate it if you click the button. I mean, you don't have to. I'm really awkward asking people for things. So, tactics. I'm not awkward talking about that. I'm just a nerd. I have gone back and forth on being more expressive, right? I've gone back and forth on that you can over roam from position, and then when you have no positional discipline, it can be a bit of a disaster, and that's not really what positional play is about. Like, I'm not giving the team completely free license to go wherever the heck they choose. I'm giving certain players more license to go wherever the heck they choose. I'm creating positions that allow players to drift. When you click be more expressive, that is essentially my team is more talented than yours, and I don't want to make a tactic that is just reliant on you always being Man City. In transition, this is tremendously frustrating, but you absolutely want to counter press, counter distribute quickly. Pep likes to play quickly when you get the ball in an advantageous position, and when you turn it over, trying to turn them over, shrink the field, and get the ball back as quickly as possible is a key tenet. Distributing, though, has been one of the main struggles for me. And we're going to break this down when we look at the match, but my goodness, goalkeeper distribution is really annoying in FM22. They just often won't listen to you, and if Ederson's not listening to you, then your goalkeeper's probably not going to be able to execute exactly what you want either. Two trains of thought, totally dependent on whether your team is getting pressed up the middle or out wide. For example, if you're playing a 4-3-3, you'll be facing a winger, and a striker. So you probably want to distribute to one of your two center backs, because then they're going to draw somebody out of position. They can make a pass, and life is easy. If you are getting pressed by a front two, maybe even a front three, if it's a front two, you can split them by distributing to your defensive midfielder. In this case, Rodri, you just kick the ball up the middle, and then all of a sudden one of them has to commit, or you can just turn and carry up the middle of the field. There's going to be an open side every time. You're trying to overload the press. If they're pressing with a front three narrow, just distribute to your fullbacks. It's an easy move. Distribute to the fullbacks. And if you're just trying to be a baller, you can just go distribute fullbacks and center backs. Even if you have all this on, your goalkeeper will still send it a lot. Then we go to your out of possession. Like I said, Pep loves to shrink the field. He likes to be very far up. This can be a bit of a problem, and you can drop this line back one if you find yourself being super duper exposed, but keep the much higher line of engagement. You need to meet the opposing team the moment they get on the ball. You need to meet their midfield in their half and try to turn them over. If you're getting absolutely eviscerated on this, then you might just not have the right personnel to play this way. You can continue to drop the back line all the way to standard, but you have to be aware that if you are exposed in the midfield, like even if it's just a 3-on-3 in the midfield, your midfield might drag themselves out of position. But this can be a way to help you cope with extreme speed. Get stuck in, I also consider important, because you're trying to win the ball back as quickly as possible. Find yourself picking up a bunch of fouls because they're a great dribbling team. Stop, and then prevent short goalkeeper distribution. You are collapsing on everything. You trigger the press as much as humanly possible, and you don't use the offside trap because you are not trying to create dead ball turnovers. There's a phrase in basketball, actually, you try and create live ball turnovers. You want to turn the ball over with a chance to do something with it. That's that you're trying to get in, get the ball, and then attack out of that quickly with your fluid movement. Positive mentality just generally works best on this kind of stuff, because if you go attacking with too much fluidity, they usually don't have enough defensive shape. Now, I did go attacking in the second half when we were playing Brentford, and it produced another goal. So, look, mentality is more dependent on how you're feeling about the game and your team, less so on exactly what tactic you are trying to execute. This can work in balance. This could work on very attacking. Once you get to cautious, if this is a match where you're going to need to be cautious, now we might be talking about another tactic that you might want to use. You need to at least be in the realm of talent to compete with the team you're playing against. So I watched all of the matches on comprehensive highlights, which is part of the reason this took so long, but I watched them on comprehensive highlights, and I took notes so that I could tell you exactly how things were going. Let's go to the next highlight here. So our first example of how this fluid play is supposed to work, what we're looking for are overloads. So Jack Grealish, in this case, I started him first half as a Trequartista, second half as a Raumdeuter, just to see how both of those played, because like I said, totally dependent on what team you're playing against as to what I actually wanted Jack Grealish to do. But Grealish starts inside as a trequartista brings the ball out. He's looking to dribble. Cancelo, who I've told to stay wider on the left, it's not necessarily something he's super comfortable with, but because of injuries, the balance of the team is actually a little strange on Man City. I just wanted to get the team on the field with quality. And Cancelo plays it inside, but Jack Grealish is already moving. Trequartistas are active moving roles, but when Grealish starts to go inside, Cancelo follows him down the side, and what I want you to watch is Kevin De Bruyne. So Kevin De Bruyne moves into channels. When he sees this channel open up, he is going to step to the outside. Grealish is now inside. Kevin De Bruyne moves into the channel, and now Jack Grealish has worked his way inside. It's completely different than the way that it looked. When all of a sudden Grealish was wide, Cancelo was behind him, and De Bruyne was inside, that triangle has dissipated. But now Rodri's recreated it. Cancelo is wide, and when you have these wide players, which Man City uses aggressively, the big, long, looping switch. If you can get that player trait on your players out of the midfield from one fullback to the other fullback, likes to switch the ball to the other flank, it'll be very, very effective in this tactic. And if we pause this right here, we have completely distracted their entire midfield. We've got 3 guys guarding 2 players because we've knocked the ball around. We've passed it off of both of them, causing them to commit. The ball goes back to Cancelo, and if we look across the back, all of a sudden, we have 4 players against 4 players applying that pressure. Watching Kevin De Bruyne again, he cuts inside away from that because he's fluid and he's returning to his basic role. And once you work to one side and then work your way back out of it, because of course we're shorter passing, we've worked our way back out of it. Their midfield is behind the 8 ball. Gabriel Jesus is dropping in, which draws one center back. The other one's not able to pick up Bernardo Silva, who does a fabulous job of not scoring. But because he's on that side opposite of Grealish, Riyad Mahrez is sticking outside of him. Bernardo Silva has a clear lane to cut across the face of a center back. And honestly, if you can get man on man all the way across the back line and then get someone with a position to pass to it, you should be able to connect a good pass in on goal every time. Because guess what? That's an overload. The moment Kevin De Bruyne turns into this space and these 2 defenders become a non-factor, all of a sudden it is 3 against 3 right in the center of the park with Kevin De Bruyne, the extra man, to pick out the pass. Playing it to Gabby Jesus, there's just no time to recover for them. I wish he'd scored this goal, honestly. And in FM22, pressure from midfielders is very feasible. It's one of the best parts about FM22 tactically is that we're going to be able to replicate that part of Pep's tactics because De Bruyne and Bernardo Silva can both make really penetrating runs that are every bit as dangerous as the center forwards. And when Gabby Jesus is your center forward, you're going to need that. Next, we have a turnover. So Riyad Mahrez wins the ball. And because we have a wingback who is definitely looking to make plays, Kyle Walker takes off. This is a key tenet of positional play. Riyad Mahrez has dropped deep to pick the ball up. Kyle Walker has fired himself up the side to keep wing pressure on. It's going to allow us to knock the ball around here. And when you have a wing back on support, somebody looking to get up the field, Kyle Walker actually gets far enough up the field to pick up an offside call trying to compensate. Because we have these wing backs on stay wider instead of drifting inside, the only place they can drift to remove themselves from somebody else's bubble, which Riyad Mahrez in this case was in Walker's bubble, up the field, and so they will gun it. Let's see how this plays because of the tempo and in transition. We have Cancelo winning an aerial duel, and it comes to Jack Grealish, who has dropped into a lower position. Cancelo's immediately exploding up the side because the position that they just found themselves in is not a healthy position. There's too many players in too short a space. So Grealish pops it inside to De Bruyne, and Gabby Jesus, instead of looking to make a run up like an advance forward, has dropped into a pocket of space. Gabby Jesus dropping into this pocket of space. The run's ongoing all over here. That has spread out the defense. There's a very clear passing lane for Gabby Jesus, and Bernardo Silva is immediately looking to attack with all of his different instructions, including obviously get further forward, throws himself into the box, and is able to create a goal. The center backs are expecting that threat to come from the advance forward. If Gabby Jesus had not presented for the ball and had gone further forward, then not only there wouldn't be space for Bernardo Silva, center backs would have seen that coming, or more likely seen it coming. Bernardo Silva is the late arriving run while everybody's paying attention to the 4 players knocking the ball around on the left side after the turnover. There's so many things for the defense to look at. You don't see Bernardo Silva slipping in behind. One quality pass and you're there. Let's start with João Cancelo on the ball. He advances the ball and passes it to Grealish. It's at this point that Jack Grealish actually has 2 different triangles to play with. Now, De Bruyne looking to move into channels is already wide enough that you have one long triangle over here. Jack Grealish can also make the decision to turn in, and because you have the fluidity of a center forward, Gabby Jesus is here presenting another triangle with De Bruyne. Jack Grealish is going to choose to engage with that triangle, but the dropping of the center back to try and accommodate Gabby Jesus opens up the other center back to dealing with a full dead sprint from Bernardo Silva that he has to deal with rather uncomfortably, but he has. Good choice from Jack Grealish. But it came out to Riyad Mahrez, who's going to get it out to Walker, and then all of a sudden we've got Bernardo Silva, Riyad Mahrez, and Kyle Walker creating a triangle. It's important to note that when one of your center mids goes forward, the winger will actually drop back and they'll trade places. So now it's Bernardo Silva leading the charge to the end line. Once they get to the end line, the winger will occupy a position like this, forcing the defense to either stretch out or provide a free crossing opportunity. I hate the goalkeepers in this though, because even though I've told them all the instructions I showed you, which all involve short passing to help keep possession, you see Ederson under no significant pressure here just absolutely send it. From what I've discovered, there's really no way to avoid that. More examples of wing inversion. We see Kyle Walker getting farther up the wing. We see Riyad Mahrez lagging back as Bernardo Silva is advancing the ball, and if he's able to beat his man, he'll drive forward, and Riyad Mahrez, as that inverted winger, will cut in. This opens up space for Kyle Walker, and then you just get this nice fun exchange of play. Silva actually ends up being offside, but we've replicated almost all of Pep's tenets when it comes to actually playing the game. Positional overloads, a fluidity, an ability to score goals from different positions, putting the onus on players to make decisions and change the priority of play, just a boatload of triangles all over the field, a balance and interchangeableness that is honestly addicting to watch in real life and was really fun to watch in Football Manager. The goalkeeper distribution has been a little frustrating to mimic. The wingers will require some tender love and care depending on who you're playing in that position. You have to play to their strengths and try to exploit the opposition's strengths, weaknesses. You can exploit their strengths too. I mean, it is Brentford, right? We're honestly better in FM than I expected. Until we figured out the perfect formula. The pressing, though. I wasn't really able to show you a concrete example of that, but the pressing, the way that Pep is able to change his entire formation in order to press more effectively and get a front four, there's just no way for us to do that and preserve the integrity of everything else that he does. Now, what you could do is try something like this, lower your line of engagement by one and just play like that. It could work and create a lot of pressure, but to be perfectly honest, I think you're much better off hanging out with what we were doing before and loading up Pep Guardiola. It is in the Steam Workshop right now. It'll also be linked down below so you can download it from FM Base if you do not have access to the Steam Workshop. Thank you for watching. If you like this sort of stuff, it takes some serious time to make sure that we've got a good representation, but I enjoyed it. I would love to make more guides on how to replicate, say, Simeone's tactics or Tuchel's tactics at some point in the future. So, see you in the comments. See you on stream. Have a wonderful day. And long live the Pep. This tactic and $1 billion in transfers, and you'll still not win the Champions League in no time.